The letter was 2 pages long. Shin Yoonjae had spent 3 weeks writing it, and it took less than 30 seconds for everything to go wrong. He set it on Kang Siwon's desk with both hands, a deliberate gesture, professional, final, and straightened his spine the way he always did when he needed to feel taller than he was. The office was quiet. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Han River below, gray and wide under a January sky. He had not expected all 3 of them to be there. He had planned for one. He had prepared for one. There were 3. Siwon sat behind the desk, already reading. Seojun stood at the window, hands in his pockets, ice blue hair catching the morning light. Daehyun leaned against the far wall like he'd been there for hours, watching Yoonjae the way a man watches something he's already decided about. Nobody spoke. Yoonjae's suppression chip pulsed once behind his left ear, a warm, mechanical flicker that meant his body was registering something his mind was trying very hard to ignore. 3 alphas. Same room. Same blood. The air was heavy in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. Then Daehyun said, "You know what you are to this organization, Yoonjae." Not a question. Yoonjae's throat tightened. "An employee." "No." Daehyun's eyes were the color of a winter sky with no warmth left in it. "You are the only person in 6 months who has not tried to steal from us, report us, seduce us, or run. You stayed. You did your work. You never asked for more than you were owed." The pause that followed carried years of things Yoonjae couldn't see yet. "Do you understand how rare that is? That's called professionalism," Yoonjae said carefully. "That's called trust," Seojun said from the window. No charm in it. Just a word, clean and honest, dropping into the silence like a stone. The door locked. The sound was soft. A single click. Yoonjae did not move. Then Seojun crossed the room, picked up his phone from the desk, and slid it across the surface toward Yoonjae without a word. On the screen was a photograph. Yoonjae, standing outside his Maplegu apartment building. Coat on. Bag over one shoulder. The timestamp in the corner read this morning, 7:42 a.m. His chest went cold. His best friend Wonsok had called him at 11 the night before. Yoonjae hadn't answered. He knew now that was a mistake. Standing in that locked office with a photograph of himself on Seojun's phone, his mind pulled back, fast and sharp, the way it always did when he needed to calculate rather than feel. He thought about the job listing. 8 months ago. Posted on a private employment board, clean language, no company name visible until the second interview. He'd been 30 days from eviction. His previous employer had collapsed in a tax fraud scandal that had nothing to do with Yoonjae, and destroyed him anyway. The suppression chip surgery had cost $4 million one he didn't have, borrowed against a future that kept moving further away. He had been desperate. He had applied. He had been hired in 48 hours. He had told himself he was lucky. Wonsok's voicemail was still sitting unread on his phone. He could almost hear it now. "Yoonjae, I'm serious. I did some research. You need to get out of that building tonight." His best friend wasn't dramatic. That was what made it worse. What Yoonjae knew about the Kang brothers from the outside world, Forbes Korea covers, charity galas, a conglomerate worth more than most mid-sized countries. KBH Holdings. Clean buildings. Clean suits. What he knew from 6 months inside, the calls that came after midnight. The men who arrived without names and left without conversation. The shipping manifests that didn't match any registered vessel. The way every person who worked for the brothers moved, not like employees, but like soldiers who had chosen their general personally. He had kept his head down. He had done his job. He had not asked? Siwon set the resignation letter flat on the desk and looked at him directly for the first time that morning. "Chairman Oh Byung-jin knows your name, Yoonjae." A beat. "He also knows your designation." The chip behind Yoonjae's ear went very still. So did he. What else did Oh Byung-jin know? "Keep watching. This story is just getting started." They laid it out like a business proposal. That was the most disorienting part. Siwon spoke first, measured, precise, the way he did everything. A private residence in Hanamdong. Full security detail. Continued employment at double his current salary. Non-disclosure terms extended and formalized. Everything clean. Everything documented. Yoonjae stood on the other side of the desk and listened and understood, with perfect clarity, that what they were offering him was a cage built from very expensive materials. "You're describing a relocation," he said. "We're describing a solution," Siwon said. "You're describing protection," Seojun corrected, and he said it the way someone says a word they mean completely. No performance in it. Yoonjae looked at Daehyun, because Daehyun always told the clearest version of the truth. "And if I decline?" Daehyun considered him for a long moment. "Oh, Byungjin has your home address, your designation status, your financial records, and the name of your emergency contact." He paused. "The alternative is not something I'm willing to finish describing." The room was quiet. Through the windows, Seoul moved below them, oblivious, ordinary, impossibly far away. Yoonjae thought about Wonsok's name in his emergency contact file. He thought about his apartment, and the 3 locks on the door that had always felt like enough. He thought about 6 months of quiet professionalism that had apparently, without his knowledge, made him the most important civilian in the Kang brothers' orbit. The contract was already printed. Seojun set a pen beside it without pressure, no push, no rush. Just the pen and the paper and the weight of what sat underneath both. Yoonjae picked up the pen. He signed. His hand didn't shake once. That terrified him more than anything else that had happened this morning. He just signed his life into the hands of 3 of the most dangerous men in Korea, and felt nothing but calm. The Kang private residence in Hanamdong did not look like a fortress. That was the first thing Yoonjae clocked, how deliberately it had been built to look like nothing threatening at all. Stone and glass and clean lines set back from the street behind a low wall draped in winter ivy. Inside, the ceilings were high and the floors were warm pale wood, and the original Korean contemporary art on the walls was the kind that cost more than Yoonjae's entire education. His room had 3 monitors. Already set up. Calibrated to his exact configuration. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, and did not say anything. Ajumma Choi found him 20 minutes later. The housekeeper was a compact woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and the energy of someone who had survived considerably worse than one nervous new resident. She tested him immediately, handed him a scheduling conflict she presented as casual, and watched his face as he processed it. He recognized the test for what it was and didn't acknowledge it. Instead, he spent 4 minutes untangling a double-booked international call that had apparently been quietly derailing the brothers' Thursday operations for 9 days. Something nobody had told them. Ajumma Choi looked at the corrected schedule. Then she looked at him. Then she said, "Tea?" in a tone that meant something had shifted. From the mezzanine above, Siwon stood with his arms folded, watching all of it without a word. Yoonjae felt the weight of that gaze on the back of his neck, and did not look up. He was getting very good at not looking up. That night, he found a handwritten note on his pillow. 3 lines. His full coffee order, specific temperature, specific ratio, the brand of oat milk he only bought from one particular convenience store near his old apartment. Written in Daehyun's handwriting. Yoonjae did not remember ever telling any of them. The shipping crisis hit at 1:47 in the morning. Yoonjae was still awake, he usually was, in new spaces, his body cataloging every unfamiliar sound, when the alert hit his work system and 3 separate manifests collapsed simultaneously across 2 time zones. He was already pulling the files when his door opened without a knock. Seojun leaned against the frame, hair loose, jacket missing, looking like a man who also never fully slept. He looked at Yoonjae's screens. He said nothing. He walked in and pulled up a chair. Siwon arrived 4 minutes later. Daehyun 2 minutes after that. Nobody called a meeting. Nobody issued an order. They simply gathered around the same table the way 3 parts of a single system come back to center, and then they worked. Yoonjae had never seen them like this before, stripped of the formal distance, moving fast and quiet, each one covering the other's blind spots without discussion. Siwon handled the international carrier contacts. Seojun rerouted the secondary manifest in less time than Yoonjae thought was possible. Daehyun caught the error inside the billing chain that had started the whole collapse, and he caught it in the dark, at 2 a.m, in under 90 seconds. They were extraordinary. Yoonjae filed that fact away and kept working. At some point he muttered something under his breath about the carrier's documentation standards. Not kind, not meant to be heard. Seojun's head came up. He looked at Yoonjae with complete surprise and then laughed. Not a polished laugh. A real one. Unguarded, quick, the kind that escapes before a person can decide whether to let it. Siwon reached across Yoonjae for a printed manifest. His hand landed over Yoonjae's on the table. Neither of them moved away immediately. A second. Maybe 2. Then Siwon took the document, and said nothing, and Yoonjae's chip pulsed warmly, and he looked back at his screen as if his hands weren't unsteady. Our father built the original shipping network, Daehyun said quietly, out of nowhere. No setup. No context. He spent 11 years growing it. He was killed before he saw it completed. He turned a page. We completed it. 3 sentences. Yoonjae did not ask a single question. He understood, somehow, that the gift was in the telling, not in the response. The crisis was resolved by 3:20 a.m. The room had settled into something almost comfortable, warm in the blue dark of the monitors, all 4 of them quiet and capable and close. Then the security panel on the wall lit red. A sharp, single tone. Seojun's expression went flat in under a second. Siwon stood. Daehyun was already moving. Someone had breached the outer perimeter. Something just moved in the dark outside that residence, and nothing about this night is over. Stay with us. The security alert had been a probe. That was what Siwon said the next morning, a test of their response time, not a real breach. Someone measuring the gap between alarm and action. Yoonjae heard the explanation and nodded, and said nothing about the fact that his chip had been misfiring since 3 a.m. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't hurt. It was more like a radio losing its signal, the suppression cycling on and off in irregular pulses, unable to hold steady in a space saturated with 3 unmated alphas living at close range under sustained pressure. The chip was medical grade. It had never failed him before. It was failing him now, and Seojun noticed before Yoonjae had decided what to do about it. You keep touching your ear, Seojun said. They were alone in the east corridor, the morning still gray through the glass. Yoonjae lowered his hand. It's nothing. Seojun looked at him the way he rarely looked at anything, still, direct, without the warmth he usually kept running like a current between himself and the world. We didn't hire you by accident, Yoonjae. The sentence landed differently than anything said in that locked office days ago. This was not a negotiation. This was not a threat reframed as care. This was a man choosing, deliberately, to say a true thing out loud. The listing, Yoonjae said carefully. We wrote it for you. Specifically. Seojun held his gaze. We had been watching your work for 4 months before you ever saw that posting. The chip pulsed. Yoonjae's voice stayed level. How long before I applied? Seojun glanced toward the far end of the corridor where Siwon had appeared, quiet as weather, and was now watching them both. Siwon crossed the distance without hurry. He stopped in front of Yoonjae and said, in the same tone he used for things that were simply facts. 14 months. Yoonjae went completely still. 14 months ago he had been at his previous company. Before the scandal. Before the collapse. Before any of this. They had been watching him before his life fell apart. Which meant they knew exactly how it had fallen apart. Which meant the question forming in the back of his mind, the one he was not ready to ask yet, was whether any of it had been accidental at all. What did the Kang brothers know about how Yoonjae's last job really ended? The answer will change everything. Daehyun took him to the rooftop at dusk without explanation, just a look across the room and a single movement toward the stairwell door that Yoonjae, after 8 months, had learned to follow. Seoul spread out below them in every direction, lit amber and blue, the Han River a dark ribbon through the middle of all that light. The cold was sharp. Either of them commented on it. KBH Holdings moves pharmaceutical logistics through 3 shell carriers, Daehyun said, looking at the city. 2 of those carriers operate outside registered shipping lanes. The Architectural Development Division acquires properties for purposes that do not appear on any public filing. He paused. We are not criminals in the way that word is usually meant. We are the reason certain things in this city do not get worse. That is the most honest framing I can offer. Yoonjae stood beside him and listened. The man who ran the last operation like ours was someone our father trusted completely. He was close to all 3 of us. Daehyun's voice stayed flat and even. When our father died, that man sold the network's routing information to Chairman O for enough money to disappear. We were 17. He turned and looked at Yoonjae directly. You are the first person since then who has been inside this organization and had nothing to gain from what you know. The wind moved between them. There is a car downstairs, Daehyun said. The door is unlocked. I have had your account settled and a reference letter prepared under a clean name. You can leave tonight and Oh Byungjin will have no reason to follow you. We can redirect his attention. He held Yoonjae's gaze without flinching. This is a real choice. I need you to know that. Yoonjae looked at the city for a long time. He thought about his Maplegu apartment. The 3 locks. The 2 master's degrees. The suppression ship he'd gone into debt for because the world required him to be less than he was. He went back inside. When he came through the rooftop door, Daehyun was still standing where he'd left him. And for the first time in 8 months, the most composed man Yoonjae had ever encountered looked completely undone. The message arrived through Ajama Choi's personal tablet, which meant someone had gotten close enough to compromise her device, which meant the breach was no longer external. Yoonjae read the message before the brothers did because he was standing beside her when she found it. 3 lines. His full legal name. His designation. And a location, his old apartment building in Maplegu, where Won-sok still lived 2 floors above the unit Yoonjae had vacated. His blood went cold. He forwarded it to all 3 brothers simultaneously, and was already pulling the residential security feeds for Maplegu before any of them walked into the room. The brothers' response had no discussion in it. Siwon made 2 calls in under 4 minutes. Seojun was already moving Ajama Choi to the inner wing, voice low and steady, one hand briefly on her shoulder, the most openly gentle Yoonjae had ever seen him. Daehyun appeared beside Yoonjae's station, looked at the feeds, and said, Won-sok is already with our people. He's been moved. A beat. Since this morning? Yoonjae exhaled once. Just once. They moved him to the inner suite, deeper in the residence, no exterior windows, the kind of room that existed specifically for this. All 3 brothers were there that night. Not hovering. Just present, the way a wall is present, solid, deliberate, between him and whatever was outside. The chip failed completely just after midnight. Not a flicker this time. A full stop. 6 years of suppression, and his body simply refused to continue the performance. The room shifted in a way Yoonjae felt in his throat, his chest, his hands. He sat very still and looked at the floor and breathed. Siwon crossed the room and crouched in front of him, eye level, close. His voice dropped to something that had no command in it at all. Yoonjae. Just his name. Said like it was something Siwon had been carrying carefully for a very long time and was only now setting down. That was the moment. Not a declaration. Not a confession. Just his name, in that voice, in that room, and Yoonjae felt it move through him like the first warm day after a winter that had lasted years. The alarm didn't scream. It went silent. That was how Yoonjae knew it was real. Every drill, every test, every false perimeter trigger had produced noise. This produced nothing, a complete blackout across 3 security panels at once, the kind of coordinated cut that required inside knowledge and outside resources working in the same breath. Yoonjae was already at his desk. His fingers moved before the thought fully formed. 6 months ago, quietly, across 4 separate maintenance windows, He had built a secondary lockdown protocol into the residence system. Not because anyone asked. Because he had looked at the existing architecture and seen the gap, a 30-second window between primary failure and backup engagement where the building was open. He had closed it himself and filed it under routine optimization and said nothing. He activated it now. Steel panels dropped across the lower entry points. Internal doors sealed in sequence. The server room isolated. He bought the brothers 4 minutes, maybe 5, carved from nothing but foresight and the habit of caring about things nobody assigned him to care about. Then he sat very still and waited. Seojun came back first. He dropped into the chair across from Yoonjae without a word, right hand resting on the table, 2 fingers wrapped around the others, knuckles swollen and dark. Yoonjae retrieved the first aid kit without being asked and wrapped his hand with the same quiet focus he gave every task. Seojun watched like it was happening to someone else. Neither spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full of everything they had stopped pretending they didn't feel. Daehyun arrived 20 minutes later, shirt collar torn at the shoulder. He sat on the couch and leaned his head back and controlled his breathing with the discipline of a man who had learned young that falling apart was not an option. Yoonjae moved to him, assessed the shoulder with careful hands, found deep bruising but no break, pressed a cold pack against it, and held it there until Daehyun's breathing finally slowed. Daehyun's hand came up and covered Yoonjae's for 1 second, warm, certain, then dropped away. That 1 second said more than an hour of words. Siwon came through the inner corridor just past 4 in the morning. Still buttoned. Still composed. A dark stain on his left cuff that was not his own. He stopped when he saw all 3 of them, Yoonjae awake at the table, both brothers settled, the first aid kit open, the room quiet and tended and whole. Something moved across Siwon's face. Fast and real and completely unguarded. The architecture of all that control, cracked open by the simple sight of this, of being returned to. Yoonjae stood. He crossed the room and stopped in front of Siwon and looked up at him in the low light. Then he reached up and touched the back of his own left ear, where the chips sat beneath the skin. 6 years of distance. 6 years of making himself smaller than what he was. He looked at Siwon and said, "I want it removed." 3 words. And the room exhaled like it had been holding its breath for 8 months. What comes next will change all 4 of them forever. Stay right here. The procedure took 11 minutes. The brothers' private physician was a quiet man named Dr. Juno who asked no questions and left no paperwork, and had clearly performed this specific task before. Yoonjae sat in the residence's medical room with his eyes forward and felt the small, precise pressure of the extraction, and then it was done. A chip the size of a thumbnail, placed in a steel dish. 6 years of suppression, ended in under a quarter of an hour. The bond didn't arrive like a storm. It came the way dawn comes, gradual, total, and impossible to stop once it had begun. Warmth moving through him in slow waves, his body finally allowed to recognize what it had known for months. He felt all 3 of them at the edges of it, distinct, different, unmistakable. Siwon like deep water. Seojun like a fire someone had kept carefully banked. Daehyun like stone that had been warmed through by long, patient sun. He sat with it. He didn't fight it. For the first time in a very long time, Shin Yoonjae stopped performing the act of needing nothing. Chairman Oh Byung-jun was handled within the week. Yoonjae didn't ask for details. He understood by then the difference between information he needed and information that would only cost him peace. 8 months passed. Yoonjae still managed their schedules. He still took minutes in 3 languages, Korean, English, and the Mandarin he'd spent 6 months improving specifically because Daehyun's maritime contacts required it, and nobody had asked him to, and he'd done it anyway. He still muttered under his breath during board meetings when the quarterly maritime logistics reports contained errors that a moderately attentive intern should have caught. Seojun now laughed openly every single time, with no performance in it, the real laugh that Yoonjae had first heard at 2 in the morning over a shipping crisis, unguarded and quick and entirely his own. Siwon's office had a second chair now. It had appeared one morning without comment, positioned exactly where Yoonjae tended to stand during their working sessions, and neither of them acknowledged it directly because they didn't need to. Acknowledgement would have made it smaller than it was. Daehyun said good morning every day in exactly 4 words. The words changed, some mornings formal, some mornings quiet, once, memorably, in archaic Joseon-era Korean that made Yoonjae stop in the corridor and stare at him for a full 3 seconds before Daehyun walked away with the faintest possible suggestion of satisfaction on his face. 4 words, every morning, without fail. Yoonjae had stopped pretending it was not the best part of his day. Ajumma Choi had stopped testing him somewhere around the 3rd month and started saving him the good tea, the expensive loose-leaf kind she kept in an unlabeled tin that she had never once offered to a staff member before Yoonjae. He drank it every morning and never mentioned it, and she refilled it every week and never mentioned it either, and that was its own kind of language. On a Tuesday in September, with the Han River visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass and the late summer light laying itself across the pale wood floors, Yoonjae sat at his desk and drafted a document. Not a resignation letter. He would never write one of those again. This was a permanent contract amendment, one he had prepared with the same precision he gave everything, binding, formal, 3 signature lines at the bottom. He printed it. He walked to Siwon's office. All 3 brothers were there, the way they so often were now, the universe apparently having decided that this was simply where they all existed. Yoonjae set the document on the desk and stepped back. Siwon read it first. Something quiet and deep moved across his face. He picked up the pen and signed without hesitation and slid it to Seojun, who read it and looked at Yoonjae for a moment with those warm, unguarded eyes and then signed his name like it was the easiest thing he had ever done. Daehyun read it last. He looked up at Yoonjae before he signed, held his gaze for exactly long enough to say everything that Daehyun never said in excess words, and then added his signature below his brother's. 3 names. Clean ink on white paper. The door to the office was unlocked. It had been unlocked for months. Yoonjae looked at it for a moment, that door, the one that had clicked shut on a January morning when he was holding a resignation letter in both hands and thinking his life was ending. He turned back to the 3 men in the room. He stayed. Not because the door was locked. Not because he had nowhere else to go. Not because he had signed anything, or owed anything, or feared anything anymore. Because this room, these 3 men, this life that had found him in his most desperate and careful hour, was the truest thing that had ever happened to him. And Shin Yoonjae, who had spent 6 years suppressing everything his body and his heart had been trying to say, was done being quiet about what he knew to be real. The resignation letter had taken 3 weeks to write. The amendment had taken him 1 afternoon. He already knew which document would last. If this story moved you, if you felt every locked door and every quiet morning and every moment these 4 people chose each other, then this channel is your home. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Every week we bring you a new world, a new connection, a new love that was never supposed to happen and couldn't be stopped. Leave a comment and tell us what this story meant to you. Tell us which moments stayed with you. Tell us if you cried, if you smiled, if you sat with it after it ended. And if you know someone who needs a story like this one, someone who needs to be reminded that the right door eventually opens, share this with them. You never know whose life a story can reach. We will see you in the next one.